Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that's comic book day. That's the time for the epic comic book team-up between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we join the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to discuss the comic books on which we have wasted our youth. We started off just talking about Marvel Epic Collections, which is Marvel's full-color paperback reprint run that has lots and lots of interesting jumps. It doesn't just go in straight chronological order. So there's always something to talk about there. And Michael has an inordinate number of epic collections. And since I'm the one who did the horning in on this whole subject, I decided to let him do the picking. So I don't know. I'm not choosing the path that we take here. And every once in a while, we will range a field of epic collections. There's a lot of other comic stuff to talk about. But today we're going to an epic collection. And it's an epic collection that includes a classic pivotal turning point in Marvel Comics, or so it is always called. The epic collection is The Goblin's Last Stand. This thing right here. And the scripts and general ideas, some of the breakdowns, some of the tweaks in dialogue were done by Stan Lee, but at this point he was giving over the writing to Jerry Conway, who was trying to carry on. He was in the awkward position of trying to carry on the Stan Lee legacy without really being the same kind of writer. And the art in here is John Romita Sr., who is responsible for the classic visual iteration of Spider-Man. But the artwork also shifts to Gil Kane, another great writer, but another great artist, but a very different kind of artist. John Romita Sr. is all about classic panel control. And Gil Kane is not. Gil Kane is a very languid, sensual writer, or artist, rather. You get some very interesting effects when you have John Romita Sr. ink Gil Kane's work. And that happens a couple of times in here, but this famous cover, as you can see, those are the steel cables. This is the Brooklyn Bridge. And this is the climax of this issue. Now, that is the cover of the issue, but I also want to show you some of the artwork so that you know what I'm talking about, because some of the artwork in this collection is absolutely gorgeous. And one of the reasons for that is because some of the artwork in this collection is drawn by John Romita Sr. and inked by him as well, where he inks his own work. And that, you get classic stuff like this, just beautiful work. That's a cover. Sometimes his artwork is inked by Jim Mooney, who is an okay artist in his own right, and sometimes an okay inker. He tends towards the dark and scratchy, which can really dilute. John Romita Sr. is a very bright, clean artist, and you won't get that when Mooney is inking him. Instead, you'll get these somber scratch work like that. But I want to show you most of this issue is a gang war between Dr. Octavius, Dr. Octopus, and a gangland villain called Hammerhead. Look at that. Just gorgeous. Look at how lovely that is. Just incredible. Just amazing what Romita can do. A lot of these issues are dedicated to that kind of gang warfare. I mean, the Spider-Man fights a character called the Gibbon. He fights a character called the Kangaroo. All these attempts made to make really good villains. The Smasher is also one of those. They're largely dumb, and the reason that you would read them is for the artwork. That's why you would read these things. I want to show you, where did we start off here? There are some odd bits and pieces in here that, let's see here. When there is a war between, this is just such fantastic stuff. Just incredible. What John Romita Sr. can do when he's in full control of what he's doing. Just amazing. Sorry, I don't mean to dither like this, but some of the stuff involved here is scattershot. And at one point, we get some pretty bad stuff. The gangland war between Hammerhead and Dr. Octopus involves Peter Parker's Aunt May, who believes that she wants to marry Dr. Octopus, is rather ridiculous. And so as a result, Dr. Octopus's goons are all over her house. For the whole run that's collected in this epic collection, she is basically a prisoner of Dr. Octopus. She doesn't know it. She thinks that his associates need soup and tender loving care. But when Peter Parker goes out to her rest home, he visits her, and she says, what does she say? They're just business associates of Dr. Octavius. That sort of thing. And she fusses over Peter and says, "Oh, you're such a delicate boy." And look at the grounds here. Those are the grounds of where Aunt May is living, in Dr. Octopus's old hideout, which is in Westchester. And then when Peter Parker is done, he switches to Spider-Man in broad daylight and casts his web. Where does he cast his web? Eventually he bounces around on an overpass and lands on a New York City bus that will take him into the city. That's how he's getting back to the city. He's hopping a ride on a bus. And it happens, here he enters his apartment as Peter Parker, again, in broad daylight, when everyone's watching him, we're told. Swinging through concrete canyons, aware of 1,000 fearful eyes upon him as he darts up the gray stone walls. Eyes which lose their object as he twists around several sharp-turning corners and finds himself at home. That would not work. It would certainly not work more than once. And nobody notices that Spider-Man is on top of this bus. Nobody on other overpasses notices that he's hitching a ride on the city bus. It's part of the general unrealistic nature of Spider-Man's secret identity. That Peter Parker does not change his voice like Batman. He doesn't have any kind of electronic alteration to his voice or posture. He's a teenager who puts on a costume to be Spider-Man, and when he does that, he hangs out with the same people that he hangs out with when he's not in a costume. They would know in a heartbeat that it's Peter Parker. Picture your own life. If you decided to put on a head-to-toe spandex costume that didn't muffle your voice at all, didn't change anything about you, it just was a spandex costume instead of your normal clothing, and you were to walk into your workplace, they would all say immediately, "What are you doing? Why are you wearing that costume?" It never happens. No one, even there's a period, I think you saw, there's a period in this run where Peter Parker has to use a fake mask. His real mask is missing. The real mask has glass plates over the eyes. The fake one does not. So you can see his face, for Pete's sake. No one ever puts two and two together. Peter Parker never has the same kind of problems that Superman does about people wondering about his secret identity, even though he would have more problems than Superman. Clark Kent is mild-mannered. He is meek. He doesn't put himself forward in circumstances. It would never occur to you that they were the same person. Just psychologically, it would never naturally occur to you. Whereas Peter Parker and Spider-Man are always hanging out with the same people. They would know in 2 seconds. He hangs out with trained journalists, for Pete's sake. They never put two and two together. At one point in one of the issues that's in this collection, he's handing photographs to the Daily Bugle's city editor, Robbie Robertson. And Robbie Robertson is saying, "Well, geez, where did you get these pictures? These are great. You got pictures of Spider-Man and the Hulk up in Canada? That's fantastic." And Peter Parker has a spasm of worry, thinking, "Oh my God, is he putting two and two together?" But how many times has Peter Parker, dressed as Spider-Man, sat on Robbie Robertson's windowsill at the Daily Bugle and chatted with him? This is someone that Robbie Robertson works with. There's no chance he wouldn't know that it's Peter Parker. But anyway, Peter Parker is chronically short of money in these issues. He's chronically broke. And he's a photographer for the Daily Bugle. And at one point, he's walking by, is this a city bus? He's walking by a poster of some kind that the Hulk is on the rampage in Canada. And he decides, well, I'll go to J. Jonah Jameson and I will get him to fund a trip to Canada for me to take pictures. What, is the Hulk staying at a Ramada Inn? How old is this thing? How old is this knowledge before Peter Parker gets it? But he's going to go up to Canada and the Hulk's still going to be there. Maybe he's working on a student visa. And notice when the Daily Bugle pays for Peter Parker to go to Canada, look how he boards the plane. Those days are gone. completely. That's one of the fun things here is in reading these old issues is that you see all kinds of things that don't exist anymore. People use telephones. They use payphones with coins. They walk onto the tarmac to get onto a plane. These things happened all the time. And Peter Parker eventually does go to Canada. He takes a minute to complain about how cold it is, and then he's told by General Thunderbolt Ross that the Hulk is a menace. Look at that great John Romita artwork. Just incredible. He's told that the Hulk is a menace, and he hitches a ride to go to find the Hulk with a bunch of other journalists. And they do. And Spider-Man fights the Hulk, and so does the military. And it's all kind of a muddle that is mainly saved by this incredible artwork. Just amazing artwork. Spider-Man can't possibly beat the Hulk. He knows that. He doesn't even really try. He just sort of... But you see, disastrously, we switched then from John Romita artwork to Gil Kane artwork. And it's really good, but it's completely different. And maybe that's not disastrous to most people. I didn't like it. When I was reading these issues, I was thinking, okay, well, I'm a fan of both, but stick with one or the other. Here you've got the Hulk, you've got Gil Kane inked by John Romita. And I'm not sure that it really works. But it's a big brouhaha in the middle of which Peter Parker is calling back home to Gwen Stacy, who is his longtime girlfriend, the love of his life, who's talking to him about how worried she is that Harry Osborn, Peter Parker's friend, Harry Osborn and roommate, is back on drugs again. And that all of his friends are worried about it. And they're not the only ones who are worried. Another person who's worried is Norman Osborn, the super tycoon who is Harry Osborn's father, who's a wound-up control freak under the best of circumstances, but who also, unbeknownst to him, he's having a memory incident, is the supervillain, the Green Goblin. The Spider-Man villain, the Green Goblin, who in a classic issue that Michael and I have not got to yet, in a classic issue, he kidnaps Spider-Man and learns that he's Peter Parker, pulls the mask off him. And then there's an explosion. He conveniently loses not only his memory of that secret identity, but his memory of being the Green Goblin at all. And he's fighting with that in these issues. They're being brought to the surface by the fact that he's all worried about his son. He's worried about the fact that his son is a drug addict. And there's inconclusive stuff with Spider-Man and the Hulk. There's no chance that Spider-Man can win, and he knows it. Then eventually the military shoots at the Hulk and he decides to just leave. He decides to just hop away from Canada. He's been there all this time, long enough for Peter Parker to go to the Daily Planet, pack his bags, get a plane ticket, fly up to Canada, join those journalists, find wherever the Hulk is, messing around with a dam, and engage him in battle. But he's been shot at by the military that whole time, but now he decides enough is enough, so he just leaves, and that's how the story ends. And Peter Parker goes back home to New York. And he's no sooner back home in New York than he's embroiled in the problems of Harry Osborn being a drug addict. The comic is never really explicit about it. One thing that will jump out at you in these issues is that Peter Parker really doesn't have a spider sense. Every once in a great while, Conway will remember it, but usually not. I mean, the Hulk comes out of nowhere. Most villains come out of nowhere. He's slammed into walls, caught by surprise a million times. And this is a perfect example. Here he is worrying about Harry Osborn when Norman Osborn shows up right behind him. There's no spider sense at all. Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin, and is certainly angry enough anyway, even if he doesn't remember that he is. So it makes no sense that... to see, this sort of thing happens all the time, where Spider-Man will say, it's time for Spider-Man. And he will just change into Spider-Man in full view of the public in what we've already been told very correctly is a crowded city. It just seems bizarre, that's all. And eventually the strain gets to Norman Osborn, and he remembers that he's the Green Goblin. And he remembers that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and he decides to attack Spider-Man through the people that he knows. And one of those people is Gwen Stacy, Peter Parker's girlfriend, who the Goblin takes Gwen Stacy to the top of the Brooklyn Bridge. And then they fight. And I've never really understood the Green Goblin's power set. It's never been clear how much the experiment that gives Norman Osborn his Green Goblin powers, does it make him super powerful? But During the course of the fight, the Green Goblin knocks Gwen Stacy off the bridge. And then we get a page that rightly is immortal. I've forgotten the fate of this original page, the original single page of this. I think it's highly collectible, but I've forgotten where it is right now. She falls off the Brooklyn Bridge. And Spider-Man, in an attempt to save her, webs her by her feet, which stops her progress and snaps her neck. But he doesn't know that. Somehow, a scientist, a physicist, doesn't know that. He brings her back up to the top of the Brooklyn Bridge and realizes she's dead. Now, that page was shocking for comic book readers. I remember I wasn't expecting it. This was long before the internet. I had no idea that it was coming. I had no idea that it was going to happen. And I also had no idea that we were going to get this extra element of culpability. I mean, the letters pages were full. Marvel Comics was flooded with letters from irate fans listing all the different ways that Spider-Man could have saved her. The comic goes on to say that it was the trauma of the fall that killed her. That is the official verdict. And this moment is revisited in a great Marvel miniseries that I'm sure that Michael and I will be getting to, called Marvels. And again, that story is trotted out, that it was the trauma of the fall and not Spider-Man. But I don't think there's any doubt left in this panel that Spider-Man is the proximate cause of her death. And since he is, he decides to vow vengeance on the Green Goblin. Decides, in fact, at first, to kill him. To kill the Green Goblin. I mean, it's effect. The Goblin gets away. Spider-Man knows who he is. They know each other's secret identity. He knows where to find him. He warns the cops to get away from Gwen Stacy's body. But then he says to them, he recounts their whole incident, all their whole life together. But then he says Gwen Stacy is dead and Spider-Man killed her, which is a weird and somewhat accurate thing to say. And then he takes off. So he is wanted by the police. And he finds the Green Goblin in his lair, and they fight. And there's a classic sequence here where he gets out of the way of the Green Goblin's jet flyer, and it impales the Green Goblin and kills him. And Spider-Man says, I thought it would mean more, but it doesn't. And then this issue, this epic collection, follows up with issue number 123, where very little seems to change. J. Jonah Jameson decides, once again, to hire somebody to attack Spider-Man. And in this case, the somebody is Luke Cage, Power Man. J. Jonah Jameson goes in person, gets him to attack Spider-Man. Once again, no spider sense. Luke Cage is able to just pound on him. And Spider-Man is mad at him. He's mad at being picked on. But the simple truth is that this is badly done. This is poorly written. Because Spider-Man is fresh, hours away from Gwen Stacy's death at this point. The natural shape that this comic should have taken is that Spider-Man takes out his unresolved rage and grief on Luke Cage. And that doesn't really happen in this issue. Spider-Man mostly wants to talk to him. And once they do talk, here, I want to show you the panel. Once they do talk, Luke Cage goes to the Daily Bugle and stuffs J. Jonah Jameson's money in his mouth. And that is it. That's sort of a comic note. One issue after Gwen Stacy dies. It struck me wrong then. Reading it again for today, it struck me wrong all over again. So you can see already one of the problems with this epic collection is that the cover promises the Goblin's last stand, but it's 2 issues. Most of the rest of it involves Dr. Octopus and Hammerhead, not the Green Goblin. It's certainly not the death of Gwen Stacy, which happens in 1 issue. It happens in 2 panels of 1 issue. That brings us to a problem. The main problem, you knew there was going to be a problem. This is the problem that I have with this just in general. I mean, the death of Gwen Stacy, that moment is iconic in comics. But it's also wrong. Completely wrong. In a way that I have railed against many times before on comic book Wednesdays. It's Stan Lee's fault. No matter how much he had a hand in the writing of this issue or the crafting of this story, it's still his fault for introducing real-world consequences and real-world timelines into comic books where they have no business being. And Gwen Stacy was a major character in Spider-Man. She appears right from the beginning. She's a major character in this book. It's not like Ned Leeds' mother dies or something like that. It's a major character who dies. And seems to be forgotten. Peter Parker is sort of down in the dumps for the next few issues, but Mary Jane Parker is waiting in the wings to take the place of Gwen Stacy. It is poorly done, not only because it doesn't seem like the way a normal person would grieve, or even the way a superhero in this situation would grieve, but also because it's poorly done because as a comic reader, you shouldn't be thinking about how Spider-Man would grieve if the Green Goblin killed his girlfriend. It's ridiculous. It's what Stan Lee introduced into comics, and comics have never been the same ever since. Once upon a time, for decades and decades, including the comic books that Stan Lee loved when he was younger, things never changed. No, nothing ever changed. You got a new adventure every month. It wrapped up in that month. There were no cliffhanger endings. It was fun. It was lots and lots of fun. It was very enjoyable, and it was slowly building a mythology that you could really enjoy. But nothing like this. Nothing like, not only that the Gwen Stacy is knocked off the Brooklyn Bridge, but that Spider-Man accidentally kills her. What does that do to your comic book reading experience? It has produced some wonderful moments in Marvel Comics. That page is one of those moments. But what is the inevitable result of this? Comic books are a static medium. Stan Lee can rail against that all he wants. He can establish a whole comic book empire on that not being true. But it is still true. Comics are a static medium. When you pick up a comic book, a new adventure of Captain Marvel, you want an adventure of Captain Marvel that starts and finishes in the same place. And the next month when you do the same thing, plunk down your 15 cents, you want another adventure of Captain Marvel. You don't want a villain digging up the dead bodies of Billy Batson's biological parents and animating them as zombies with laser powers to wage relentless psychological warfare on Billy Batson or whatever. You don't want any of that. Maybe readers do. I don't. I was reading this thing and I was thinking, I was having this same kind of diatribe with long-suffering friends even when this came out. And I was saying, well, you know what's going to happen here. I mean, my friends were shocked, absolutely shocked. They acted, as I often poked fun at them, as if someone they know had died. And I said to them, even at the time, well, this is the problem when you introduce this kind of real-world accountability and consequences into comic books, into superhero comic books. You know what's going to happen as a result of this story. And my friend said, yeah, Peter Parker's going to have a lifelong wound. And I said, no, it's all going to be undone. Comics are a static medium. They return to their normal equilibrium. They do almost as an organic property. And my friends were scandalized by that. But was I right? Did Gwen Stacy come back? Yes. An exact clone. Yes. Did the Green Goblin come back? Yes. As Harry Osborn? Yes. But also as Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin comes back. Is Spider-Man haunted by the death of Gwen Stacy? No. No, he's not. No, he goes on to be haunted by other things. It's the farce of introducing this kind of real-world soap opera melodrama into superhero comics is that you can't back it up. The medium doesn't support it. Right now, in current continuity Spider-Man comics, it would be entirely possible to assemble all the principles of this story and just do it over again. And what does that do if we're talking about real-world presentations of these superhero characters? What does that do to them if they know that no matter how dead someone looks, they're not dead? That no matter how dead they look, they'll be back. And that crept over to DC Comics as well. That shouldn't be there at all. We shouldn't ever be reading an issue, no matter how good it is. We should never be reading an issue in which the Green Goblin kills Gwen Stacy. That should never happen. So I'm in a minority of one here, where I'm rereading these two issues. I read the rest of these, and they're really good. But this is the reason why you would get this Epic collection. I reread these two issues and thought, all right, I'm once again a minority of one, the only person who doesn't like this storyline, fundamentally doesn't like it. But anyway, there you go. That is your Epic Comic Book Wednesday for today. This is not... Sometimes Michael and I just disagree on the comic involved. This is not that. I acknowledge how iconic this is and how enjoyable all these issues are in this collection. One fundamental disagreement maybe is that I don't think things like storylines like this should happen at all, no matter how good they're done. I think they're only to the detriment of comic books because they make them real instead of making them enjoyable. I'm in the minority. Like I said, I'm in the minority of one when it comes to that. And who knows if next week will even be an issue? It might not be. Michael may pick something absolutely atrocious, or he might pick something that's from my era of comics where nothing changes. We shall see. We'll find out together. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.